Arthur Penhaligon sat alone in his chambers on a dreary Wednesday afternoon, studying a mountain of legal briefs stacked precariously on his desk. He was a man approaching his late 40s, well respected among both peers and the general public for his sharp legal mind and unwavering commitment to honesty in the courtroom. People praised him for his dedication, proclaiming that Judge Penhaligon commanded impartiality in every case he presided over. His name carried considerable weight in the city's legal circles, and attorneys argued more carefully whenever they stood before him, knowing he would tolerate no tricks and no attempts to evade the law. Despite his prestige and the strong moral image he cultivated, Arthur's life carried a secret he guarded with extraordinary care. Quiet evenings, when he was finally free of court responsibilities, brought him a sense of solace. He would retreat to the privacy of his townhouse and step into a wardrobe filled with elegant dresses, high heels, and delicate accessories. This was not a casual hobby or a recent discovery. Ever since his early adulthood, he had found a special comfort in letting himself become Annette. In that persona, he dressed in tasteful outfits, carefully coordinated to reflect a refined sense of style. He took pleasure in selecting soft fabrics that draped gracefully over his tall frame, and the routine of hairstyling, subtle makeup, and choosing jewelry was a source of relief from the demands of his profession. Arthur never flaunted this side of himself beyond the walls of his home, and he had long preferred it remain that way. He believed no one knew about Annette, but to maintain that veil of secrecy, he took extra precautions. His windows were always shut, blinds drawn in the evenings. When he planned to dress, he would triple-check the locks, disable any motion lights that might illuminate his silhouette, and ensure that neighbors would not glimpse an unfamiliar figure through a window. He stored every item of clothing meticulously in a locked chest beneath his bed, hidden behind boxes that contained old case files and personal records. His diaries, small, discreet notebooks, held heartfelt reflections and details of the items he wore, the reason he chose them, and the calmness he felt as Annette. It was in those journals that he had mentioned his fondness for orchids, especially white and lilac varieties, which he called the emblem of Annette. Never once did he suspect that anyone might ever read those private thoughts. On that particular Wednesday, Arthur stretched his shoulders in the quiet hush of the room. His clerk, a diligent young man named Mark Lewiston, had gone home hours ago. Arthur looked at the clock. It was nearing 7 in the evening. A persistent drizzle pattered softly on the large windows, which overlooked the courthouse's side street. He sighed, already anticipating a late evening, mentally assembling a to-do list. He needed to prepare for a major hearing at the end of the week, a controversial malpractice case in which a wealthy surgeon was being sued for negligence. The outcome would ripple through the local medical community. Arthur prepared thoroughly, reading pages of witness statements and reviewing recent precedents. Once he felt his eyes drooping, he decided to call it a night. On his way out, he stopped by the front desk, expecting the usual solitary presence of the janitor. Instead, he found a small brown parcel waiting for him. There was no return address. Judge Penhaligon read a label printed in neat block letters. The handwriting gave him pause. It looked slightly too neat, as though it had been printed from a computer rather than scrawled by a human hand. The package weighed almost nothing. Curious but not yet suspicious, Arthur tucked the parcel under his arm, said a polite goodbye to the janitor, and hurried through the drizzle to his car. The commute passed in a haze of endless red lights and watery reflections in the asphalt. He got home, unlocked the front door, and switched on the foyer lamp. The hush within his house was nearly absolute. Eager to discover what was inside, he removed his wet coat, laid it on a rack, and carried the mysterious parcel to the kitchen table. He took a moment to breathe. Then he retrieved a small knife from a drawer and began slicing through the tape. The cardboard parted smoothly, revealing an interior lined with white tissue paper. The first thing he saw was a single orchid, a perfect white bloom with a pale lilac center. Immediately, his heart lurched. He recognized the exact variety he adored. It was pressed between layers of protective plastic, perfectly preserved and obviously chosen with intention. In his diaries, he had recorded how much he loved white lilac orchids, calling them a perfect expression of Annette's grace. This detail was too precise to be coincidence. Swallowing the sudden dryness in his throat, Arthur lifted the flower carefully and set it aside. Beneath it, carefully tucked among more tissue paper, lay a small USB stick. No note, no letter, nothing else. Just the orchid and the USB device. Nerves flared in his gut, and he hesitated. Eventually, he walked to his study, powered on the old laptop he kept for personal tasks, and inserted the stick. A folder popped up. Inside were half a dozen photographs. Arthur's breath caught in his chest. The images were crystal clear, shot from a slight distance. He saw himself wearing the burgundy dress he had purchased months ago, a piece he had worn only once. He could see his reflection near the living room window. Another picture showed him from behind, rummaging through the wardrobe in his bedroom. A third, him gazing at a mirror, adjusting a soft brunette wig he sometimes wore. The detail was excruciating. The photos displayed his expressions, his posture, the subdued lighting of his home. They were not grainy or distorted. Someone had obtained them, presumably by peering into his windows with a camera equipped with a powerful lens, or worse, by installing hidden cameras. Arthur felt the rising dread that his sanctuary had been pierced. He closed the laptop and leaned back, heart pounding. He had never told anyone about Annette. His diaries were hidden. He had no close confidants with whom he would have shared that aspect of his life. The presence of the orchid, chosen precisely from his journal descriptions, suggested his diaries had been discovered, or at minimum, that someone knew more about his private world than he had ever told a soul. He glanced around the study, half expecting to see a figure lurking in the hallway. The house was silent. Despite the desperation crawling through him, he methodically got up, went room by room, and checked the locks on every door and window. Then he returned to the laptop to see if there was any text file or message. Hidden among the image files, there was a short video clip. He clicked on it. A masked voice whispered, "There's a major malpractice case on your docket. You will rule in favor of the surgeon, no matter the facts. If you fail to comply, these pictures and more will be shown to your colleagues, your friends, and the press. We will ensure your name is destroyed. A single orchid represents your careful world. Don't let it wither." Then the clip ended abruptly. Arthur stared at the screen, shaken. He was known throughout the legal community for his sound, unbiased decisions. It had been one of his proudest accomplishments. No one had ever questioned his sincerity on the bench. And now he was being cornered into rendering a dishonest ruling in one of the biggest malpractice trials of the year. The conflict tore at him. If he yielded, he would betray his deepest principles. If he refused, the blackmailers would reveal everything, and Arthur's career would be shattered. His carefully constructed life would be exposed. Though the threat was devastating, losing his job and reputation was only half the nightmare. The revealing of his cross-dressing life would subject him to scandal and humiliation. He stared at the USB stick, heart racing, barely able to form coherent thoughts. He spent a sleepless night pacing across the living room, the images from the stick seared into his mind. He texted Mark, his clerk, saying he was ill and would not be in the next day. He needed time to think. Sitting in his armchair at dawn, he tried to piece together who could be behind this. With a trembling hand, he scribbled a list of possible suspects: an attorney with an interest in the malpractice case, a private investigator, or someone from the surgeon's legal team. The wealthy surgeon likely had significant resources to hire people, possibly unscrupulous ones. But how would they have known about the cross-dressing? Accessing a judge's personal diaries was a tall order. Arthur suspected they must have physically broken into his house or installed cameras. That latter possibility sent chills down his spine. The sense that his privacy had been invaded so intimately was overwhelming. Around 8 in the morning, he forced himself into a more structured plan. He would not call the police. That would lead to open investigations, and the blackmailer's threat would become all too real. Also, any mention of these pictures in an official capacity could blow up in the worst way. Instead, he needed to find a more discreet route. He decided that an investigator who specialized in quiet inquiries might be the best route to uncover how the blackmailer got the photos. Arthur reached for his phone, looking through contacts until he found that of a seasoned private investigator named John Brewster. Brewster was rumored to be thorough and discreet. Arthur had come across John a few times in his courtroom when John served as a witness for clients who had hired him. Now, ironically, Arthur was going to ask for personal help. He dialed the number, and a low, measured voice answered. "John Brewster speaking." "John, good morning. This is Judge Penhaligon. I need your assistance with a delicate matter. I can't talk over the phone. Are you free for a discreet meeting this afternoon?" There was a pause, then John cleared his throat. "Yes, Your Honor, of course. I can be at your office or wherever you need me. Would you like me to come by the courthouse or your home?" "I'd prefer the cafe on Merton Street. There's a private booth in the back. 2 o'clock. Arthur's voice wavered slightly, but he steeled himself. "I'll be there." Arthur hung up and spent the next few hours numb with worry. He tried to distract himself by reading an unrelated legal memorandum, but the lines blurred before his eyes. Eventually, he put the papers away and stared out the window, unsettled by the possibility that someone might be watching him even at that moment. The bright sunshine made him anxious. He felt as though he were exposed, every movement under scrutiny. An ominous heaviness lingered in the quiet spaces of the house. Shortly before 2, he put on a plain coat and a wide-brimmed hat. With a nervous glance around his yard, he eased into his car and drove to the cafe. Arriving, he chose a booth at the far corner, away from the windows. John Brewster arrived soon after, wearing a dark suit and tie. He was an unremarkable man to look at. Average height, short hair, a steady posture, but he carried an intense stare that never seemed to miss a single detail. As John took a seat, he nodded politely, and Arthur asked the waitress for 2 coffees, then waited until she left. "What's the matter?" John asked quietly, leaning forward. "You sounded urgent on the phone." Arthur slid a manila envelope across the table. He had printed the photos from the USB stick that morning, only a few of them, but enough to illustrate the problem. John flipped through them without so much as a raised eyebrow, but Arthur noticed the slight tightening around the investigator's lips. "I need to know who took these," Arthur said softly. "And there's a bigger issue. Someone is threatening me, blackmailing me with these pictures. They demand I rule in favor of the defendant in the malpractice case I'm overseeing." John closed the envelope. "You're certain it's connected to that case?" "They specifically mentioned it," Arthur said, his tone crisp. "I'm not at liberty to... obviously these are extremely personal. You can see why." John nodded. "I understand. First step, I'll check your home for bugs or hidden cameras. Then I'll do a background check on the major players involved in that malpractice case. We'll see if anyone hired a private eye or if there's suspicious activity among the legal teams, but it might be bigger than that. Are you aware of any staff at the courthouse who might have an interest in the outcome?" Arthur shook his head. "I can't imagine anyone at the courthouse would do this. They have a deep respect for the integrity of the system. Then again, money can push people to drastic measures." John reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notepad. "Can you give me the details of the case, or is that too delicate?" "I can give you the public details," Arthur replied. "Defendant's name is Dr. Nathan Wentworth, a renowned surgeon who's being sued. The plaintiffs argue malpractice led to a wrongful death. It's a highly publicized trial, with Wentworth's medical career at stake. The damages sought are substantial. The city's medical association is watching. There's a team of attorneys from a big firm representing Dr. Wentworth, and they're quite well funded." John scribbled notes quickly. "When is your ruling due?" Arthur inhaled shakily. "Jury selection begins in 2 days, and the trial itself will likely last a few weeks. I'll make critical decisions on admissibility of evidence, instructions to the jury, and so forth. Eventually, if there's a settlement or certain legal motions, I could affect the outcome significantly." John tapped his pen against the table. "Understood. I'll start by visiting your home. We'll see if we can figure out how someone's been snooping. It'll take a few days to dig around, and I'll be discreet. If you get any additional threats, forward them immediately. And Judge, should you even consider playing along with their demand?" Arthur's shoulders tensed. I don't know. My entire career is built on fairness and the law. But if these pictures become public, I lose everything I've worked for." He clenched his jaw. "I don't even know how I can stand on the bench without second-guessing every move." John nodded in sympathy. "Let's get to the bottom of it before you make any final decisions. Hang in there, Your Honor. I'll do my best." They parted. Arthur felt marginally better now that the matter was in a professional's hands, but a surge of shame washed over him as he pictured John studying those photographs. Still, there was no other way. He returned home, stepping inside gingerly, half expecting the phone to ring with further instructions from the blackmailer. The place was silent except for the refrigerator's hum. He made tea, sipped it while standing at the counter, and wondered how to proceed with his ordinary tasks. Over the next 2 days, John visited, scouring the property for any hidden devices. In the living room, he discovered a small camera embedded in a corner shelf, cleverly hidden behind a row of old leather-bound books. In Arthur's bedroom, taped under the dresser, was another lens, angled to capture the wardrobe. The cameras appeared expensive and were likely transmitting wirelessly to a nearby receiver or logging the footage internally. Arthur hovered near John while he carefully removed the devices. "Whoever planted these had direct access to your home," John muttered. "It wasn't just pointing a telephoto lens through a window. They had to break in, place the cameras, and then sneak out without leaving a trace. You didn't notice any sign of forced entry?" "None," Arthur replied, voice taut. "But I keep everything locked. This person must be a professional." John bagged the devices as evidence. "I'll see if the serial numbers or any internal data can be traced. But if it was done by pros, they might have used untraceable gear." He cast Arthur a reassuring look. "We'll find something." Over the next few days, Arthur had to reappear at court. His footsteps echoed down the hall, and co-workers greeted him as usual, though he couldn't help imagining that their polite smiles hid curiosity about his private life. As the days dragged on, he felt imprisoned by the unspoken threat. He found himself looking over his shoulder, flinching whenever a colleague said his name. His mind strayed frequently, drifting from the legal arguments at hand toward the blackmailer's demands. At times, he wondered if the blackmailer would send a new message or instructions. Sure enough, on the evening before jury selection, another small package arrived at Arthur's doorstep. This time the box contained another orchid and a note printed in the same crisp, impersonal font. "We expect your compliance. Resist, and your world collapses." Arthur's stomach clenched. The next morning in court, he saw Dr. Wentworth's attorneys from across the aisle. They wore confident smiles, and the lead counsel, a man named Greg Hayward, spared Arthur a polite nod. Arthur scrutinized the man's expression, but found nothing unusual. Still, the note's threatening tone lingered in his mind. The trial progressed with the usual formalities: motions, witness testimony, medical experts on both sides. But Arthur sensed an acute pressure, as though every line of questioning was a test of whether he'd cave to the blackmailer's demand. Tension built up inside him so severely that at times he worried he might stumble in his rulings. During breaks, he slipped away to phone John Brewster. "How's it going?" John asked. Arthur sighed. Another orchid arrived. Another warning. "You've found no leads." "Not solid ones," John answered. "But I did discover something interesting in Dr. Wentworth's circle. He's represented by an insurance company that has a record of lavish payouts to ensure attorneys get their way. One name popped up, an independent investigator who's worked with that insurance group in past cases. The name is Damon Roth. He's known for aggressive tactics." Arthur recognized that name vaguely. So Damon could be behind the cameras? "It's a possibility," John said. "He's highly paid, discreet, known to push ethical boundaries. I'm pulling all the threads I can on him. Stay alert." Arthur hung up and pushed the phone into his robe pocket, stepping back toward the courtroom. His nerves burned, but he forced himself to remain calm. Before him, the attorneys droned through a litany of objections and questions. His job was to maintain order, which he did with outward composure. Inwardly, he was in turmoil, but not once did he slip up in front of the jury. That weekend, John called him with a progress update. "Judge, I've found suspicious activity. Damon Roth's phone records show repeated calls to a burner number, one that I suspect was used to communicate with someone in the city. I can't prove exactly who was on the other end, but my guess is that the blackmailer is either Roth himself or someone close to him. It's possible the surgeon's legal team orchestrated this. Also, I found a large withdrawal from an account linked to Dr. Wentworth's insurance policy. This might have been used to pay for certain underhanded measures." Arthur felt a rush of anger. "So they want me to ensure Dr. Wentworth wins. That's the motive." "Seems so," John replied. "But I don't have enough to act on. If you confront them now, they might retaliate by releasing the photos. You're in a tight spot, Judge." That Sunday evening, Arthur decided to do something he hadn't done in a long while. He dressed as Annette. The front blinds were drawn, the curtains firmly closed. He chose a modest black dress, one that always made him feel steady. He applied light makeup. It helped him, if only slightly, to imagine that he was regaining a sense of control over his personal domain. In the mirror, Annette looked poised, a quiet reminder of the calm he used to find in these private moments. Yet the fear of hidden cameras or prying eyes gnawed at him. He had to trust John had removed them all. Still, he couldn't shake the suspicion that more devices could be lurking. He recalled the orchard of secrets in his diaries, that symbolic reference to the flower that now haunted him. This used to be his escape from stress. Now it was his greatest vulnerability. The next morning, he prepared to face another day in court. As he pulled into his reserved parking space, his phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. "We're watching. Remember our arrangement." Arthur's hand shook, but he summoned the composure to step out of the car. He wore his dark gray robe in the courtroom, commanded the day's proceedings, and made legally sound decisions. But each time he issued a ruling, a single question hammered in his mind. Was he being monitored, evaluated on whether he was favoring Dr. Wentworth? The trial dragged through medical records, expert testimonies, and emotional family accounts. The plaintiff's attorneys were skilled, presenting compelling arguments about negligence, while Dr. Wentworth's defense insisted that the surgeon had done everything within standard practice. In quieter moments, Arthur felt a twinge of empathy for both sides. He recognized the heartbreak of losing a loved one, and he also saw how easily a doctor might be blamed even when trying their best. From a purely legal standpoint, It was not an open and shut case. During one recess, Dr. Wentworth's lead counsel, Greg Hayward, approached the bench with a request to speak privately. They stepped into Arthur's chambers, accompanied by the plaintiff's counsel. Hayward wanted the judge to rule certain medical records as inadmissible, arguing they were prejudicial. The plaintiff's counsel said they were crucial to prove the negligence. Arthur's mind whirled. This was precisely one of the pivotal decisions that might sway the verdict. The blackmailers wanted him to side with the defense. Anxiety constricted his breathing. He excused both attorneys, stating he would review the arguments and issue a ruling the next morning. Alone in his chambers, Arthur paced, heart pounding. If he ruled to exclude the records, Dr. Wentworth's defense would gain a major advantage, edging them closer to victory. The blackmailer's threat loomed, yet the records seemed relevant from a legal perspective. They showed a timeline of the surgeon's earlier misdiagnoses, arguably establishing a pattern. Excluding them would not be in line with the rules of evidence. For the first time in his career, Arthur was paralyzed between ethical duty and personal survival. Late that afternoon, he consulted John Brewster again, explaining the situation. John's voice was calm. "If you undermine the rules of evidence, you risk the entire case's legitimacy. Any future appeal might discover irregularities, and the scandal could break eventually anyway. We still have no guarantee that the blackmailer will keep your secret, even if you comply." "But they seem determined to direct my ruling. Their messages keep arriving," Arthur said, exhausted. "This is terrifying." "I'm still pursuing leads. If I can pinpoint the blackmailer and gather proof of their extortion, maybe we can stop them, but it's not guaranteed." Arthur thanked him, ended the call, and sat behind his desk, staring at the files. Memories of the meticulously chosen orchid flashed in his mind. That pointed knowledge of his hidden diaries unsettled him. He realized that while the blackmailer demanded compliance, there was no real guarantee they wouldn't eventually use the material anyway. Blackmailers could be unpredictable. Their threat might only escalate if he gave in. The following morning, Arthur walked into the courtroom and ruled in favor of admitting the contested medical records. A hush fell across the legal teams. The plaintiff's attorneys allowed themselves a subtle smile. Dr. Wentworth's team glanced at each other with concern. Arthur maintained a neutral expression and refused to look in the direction of Dr. Wentworth. Inside, he felt panic rising. He had just defied the blackmailer, opening the door for repercussions, but at least he hadn't compromised his integrity. During a brief recess, Arthur looked at his phone. Another text message glared on the screen. "You're making poor choices. Last warning." He rushed to the privacy of his office washroom, hands shaking. How long could he endure this cat-and-mouse game? He knew he should push forward and maintain lawful rulings, yet the tension gnawed at him, the possibility of public shame looming over every minute. He tossed cold water on his face and dried it briskly with a paper towel before returning to the bench. He finished the day's proceedings with a stoic facade, avoiding any slip of emotion. That evening, John Brewster visited Arthur's home, stepping inside with a grim look. "Judge," he said quietly, "I found a potential crack in Damon Roth's operation. He has a small team working with him. One is an IT specialist who might have been involved in planting the cameras. I got a tip that they've stashed digital backups somewhere. If I can break into that stash, I might retrieve the raw footage or find evidence that directly points to the client behind this blackmail." Arthur's relief was tinged with skepticism. "Is that something you can accomplish discreetly?" "I have a friend who's a whiz with computer systems. It'll be risky, but I'll try to keep it off the radar. I just need you to hang in there a bit longer. Don't give in." Arthur nodded, though the pit in his stomach remained. He walked John to the door, then found himself alone again. The quiet house felt oppressive. He needed to remind himself why he had chosen to preserve his moral stance. Years of building a reputation as a fair-minded judge could not be thrown away because of personal fear. He poured a glass of water and sat in the living room, half watching the moving shadows cast by the streetlights. 2 days later, the trial continued with fierce cross-examinations. The plaintiffs painted a picture of repeated negligence. The defense hammered on the complexities of surgery and the unpredictability of outcomes. Arthur focused on the facts, issuing rulings as impartially as he had always done. Each time the phone vibrated in his pocket, his heart raced, imagining the blackmailer's fury. Yet no new message arrived that morning. That afternoon, during a testimony about the operating room procedures, Arthur glanced at the gallery and nearly jumped. There, in the back row, was a man wearing a suit. The man's posture was relaxed, but his eyes were fixated on Arthur. When the session ended for the day, the man vanished before Arthur could confront him. Arthur suspected that might be Damon Roth or one of his associates. The dread only deepened. Later that evening, as Arthur locked up his chambers, a voice startled him in the corridor. "Late night, Your Honor?" He whirled around. It was Greg Hayward, Dr. Wentworth's lead counsel, wearing an amiable smile, though his tone was oddly intense. "Working hard on your rulings?" Arthur nodded. "I always do, Counselor. Court must resume tomorrow." Hayward offered a polite handshake, but Arthur noticed the faint tension in Hayward's grip. "Of course. I just wanted to check if everything's all right. You seemed a bit under the weather in court today." Arthur stiffened. "I'm fine. Just have a lot on my mind with this case." Hayward's gaze lingered. "Understood. May the best arguments prevail." With that, he turned and strolled away down the corridor, leaving Arthur with a sense that this was no casual conversation. That same night, after Arthur arrived home, John Brewster called with apparent excitement in his voice. "My friend managed to penetrate a private server used by Roth's team. We found multiple folders labeled with aliases. One folder matches details that fit your situation. Inside, we found not only the video feed from the cameras installed in your home, but text documentation referencing a large payout from Dr. Wentworth's insurer to Roth's account. It seems to confirm that Roth was hired to get leverage on you to ensure a favorable outcome." Arthur's pulse hammered. "That's enough to turn over to the authorities, isn't it?" John was cautious. "The chain of evidence is questionable because of how we got it. If we produce it openly, you might face blowback for unauthorized intrusion. They could also claim evidence tampering. But we can use it strategically, maybe threaten them with exposure if they try to release your photos. In short, we can blackmail the blackmailer, or at least force them to stand down." Arthur pinched the bridge of his nose. He despised the idea of stooping to threats, but the circumstances left him no clean path. "At least it's an option. Meanwhile, the trial continues, and I can't tip my hand. If I do something publicly, they'll release my pictures in retaliation." John's voice was steady. "Let me handle it carefully. I'll try to approach Roth or his associates and tell them we have proof of their illegal surveillance. If they don't back off, we'll leak it to the authorities. That should at least protect you, but it might anger Dr. Wentworth's team if they suspect you're behind it." Arthur sighed. "Do whatever it takes." The next day, the trial's momentum shifted to closing arguments. Both sides made impassioned pleas to the jury. The plaintiffs recounted the victim's final hours, painting a grim picture. The defense insisted Dr. Wentworth had followed standard procedures. Arthur listened, stoic, and the jury retreated to deliberate. Outside the courtroom, John Brewster stepped up to Arthur, an almost triumphant look in his eye. "I spoke to Roth," he said quietly. "He was rattled when I revealed the files I have. He demanded to know how I got them. I refused to say. I told him if he releases anything related to you, I'll send the entire trove of evidence to the district attorney's office. The scale of his illegal activities is far bigger than just your case, so he has plenty to worry about." Arthur's lips parted with relief, though he felt unsettled about these backroom dealings. Did Roth say he'd stand down? He said he has to speak to his employer, but he implied they'd drop the blackmail. "This doesn't mean you're fully safe yet. We need to remain on guard." That afternoon, the jury returned a verdict in favor of the plaintiffs. They found Dr. Wentworth liable for negligence, awarding damages to the victim's family. As the verdict was read aloud, Arthur observed the defense bench. Dr. Wentworth looked stunned, and Greg Hayward's face flashed with frustration. The surgeon's supporters muttered in disbelief. Arthur, for his part, felt an odd mix of relief and a flicker of apprehension, knowing he had not bowed to the blackmail. He had let the legal process run its course. Soon after, while Arthur was gathering his papers, Hayward approached him again, anger simmering beneath his composed features. "I hope you considered everything carefully, Judge. This verdict was harsh, and it will ruin Dr. Wentworth's career. A brilliant surgeon reduced to disgrace." Arthur remained firm. "The jury considered the evidence. My decisions were in line with established procedures." Hayward's eyes narrowed. "I see. Then you must accept the consequences of your rulings." With that, he strode off. Arthur stared after him, aware of the dark subtext in the attorney's words. He returned to his chambers, found them empty, and let out a shaky breath. He recalled John's attempt to neutralize Roth. The question was whether Dr. Wentworth's team would retaliate out of frustration. That evening at home, the atmosphere felt suffocating. He paced the halls, checking his phone over and over, expecting another message that threatened exposure. He dressed in casual attire and tried to read a book, but his eyes wouldn't focus on the print. Later, as midnight approached, he heard the phone beep. Adrenaline surged. He checked the screen, a text from the unknown number. "We have lost. You are unwise. We are leaving. Don't expect more warnings." That was it. No mention of blackmail or photos. No orchid reference. Arthur sank into a chair, pressing a hand to his forehead. The short message was ambiguous, but it suggested that they were retreating. For the first time in weeks, he felt a hint of real hope. The next day, John Brewster confirmed the partial triumph. "Roth's people have gone underground, probably because they realized we have enough to expose them. They're not going to risk a bigger criminal case by releasing your photos. At least that's how it seems. They might hope to cut their losses." Arthur finally exhaled a long, pent-up breath. "So, does that mean I'm safe?" "They could always resurface, but for now, yes. I advise you to upgrade security, replace your locks, install your own cameras if you like. I think they won't bother you again, at least not for this case. They've been paid to ensure a certain outcome, and they failed. Better for them to run than risk tangling with me and my files." Arthur managed the faintest smile. "I'm eternally grateful, John. I can't thank you enough." John shrugged. "I'll send you my invoice." He let out a brief, wry chuckle. Then, with a more solemn tone, "I'm glad you upheld your principles." When the trial concluded fully and the dust settled, Arthur took a few days away from the courthouse, citing stress. Mark, his clerk, handled the paperwork. Arthur used that time to restore some sanity to his life, even if the fear wasn't entirely gone. He updated the locks. He hired a company to check for any additional surveillance devices. He stored his diaries in a different location, renting a secure deposit box. Then, one evening, he stood in his bedroom, carefully combing out the soft brunette wig he wore as Annette. In the mirror, he saw not just the refined posture of a person who took solace in elegant clothing, but someone who had been tested in a way he never dreamed possible. The next week, he returned to the bench for a new docket of cases. The tension in the hallway had receded. Colleagues welcomed him back in a friendly manner. He saw no suspicious watchers in the gallery. At times he caught a flicker of paranoia, but with each day that passed without threat or rumor, he began to trust that the blackmail had been contained. He knew that trust might always be somewhat fragile. Once a secret is almost exposed, it's difficult to feel truly safe again. A few nights later, as he sat in his study, he heard the ping of an email arriving in his personal inbox. At first, dread tugged at him, worrying it was another threatening message. Yet when he opened it, he found it was from an unknown address. The subject line, "Our apologies, no more orchids." Arthur felt his pulse spike. The short note read, "You protected your dignity. We won't trouble you further. Live your life. This is over." No signature, no demands, no mention of the photos, just a final cryptic sign-off. Arthur stared at those words, rereading them multiple times. Whoever had orchestrated the blackmail might have recognized that it was fruitless to carry on. Perhaps Dr. Wentworth's side realized any continued harassment would further incriminate them. Maybe they were acknowledging a stalemate and preferring to forget the entire fiasco. Although it was a macabre parting gesture, Arthur clung to the notion that, at last, they were done. The next morning, he summoned John Brewster one last time. Over coffee in his living room, they reviewed the final email. John nodded. "They're closing the door on the operation. We can never be 100% certain, but from my experience, that's what it looks like. Did you want me to send the evidence we uncovered to the district attorney?" Arthur mulled it over. "I'm torn. Doing so might drag me into a public scandal. My pictures and diaries could become evidence, or the blackmailers might unleash them in retaliation. I'd prefer to move on quietly." John understood. "Then that's your call, Judge. The blackmailer has broken multiple laws, but I see your position. I'll keep the files under lock, though, in case you ever need them." Arthur gave a grateful nod. "Thank you. Let's keep them as insurance, in case they ever try this again." The two men shook hands. John quietly left the house, and Arthur felt a small weight lift. In the following weeks, Arthur meticulously returned to his routine. The city's legal community buzzed about the malpractice verdict, with some praising the thoroughness of the trial. Dr. Wentworth's team filed an appeal, though no direct accusations of bias were ever made. Meanwhile, Arthur presided over other cases, as he always had, with careful attention to detail and an unwavering sense of fairness. Yet a subtle shift had occurred within him. The close brush with exposure had forced him to question whether hiding Annette was worth all the anxiety and secrecy. Still, the thought of going public was too overwhelming. He resolved that for now he would keep Annette's presence behind closed doors, but he would no longer let fear define his every moment. A few months later, on a sunny weekend, Arthur decided he needed a break from the city's tension and traveled to a nearby retreat. He packed a small suitcase, ensuring he included a few of Annette's outfits. The place he chose was a quiet bed and breakfast run by an older couple who seemed oblivious to the complexities of modern life. Tucked away in a scenic area with gardens and winding pathways, it allowed Arthur a rare moment to relax. One afternoon, he strolled through the flower garden, noticing a cluster of orchids. A single white lilac bloom caught his eye, a tender reminder of the recent ordeal. He felt a mild pang, but also a kind of resolution. The blackmailers had once tried to use that orchid to intimidate him, to represent his hidden life. Yet here it was, simply growing in the sun, beautiful in its own delicate way. Arthur found a bench and sat for a moment, letting the gentle fragrance wash over him. He knew that the scars of the blackmail attempt would always linger, but he also recognized his capacity to endure storms that threatened his most personal truths. He spent the evening quietly reading in the bed and breakfast's common area, sipping a bit of tea. Over the next days, he allowed himself time to reflect. Though the threat had dissolved, he realized that secrets could make him vulnerable to future attacks. Yet he couldn't simply abandon who he was when he was Annette. He needed no validation from others to embrace that side of his life. He just had to protect it more vigilantly. He promised himself never again to underestimate the lengths to which others might go to manipulate him. Returning to the city, Arthur walked through his front door with a measured calm. He checked each room, carefully verifying that his home remained free of any further intrusions. Then he slipped into his bedroom and looked at the locked chest beneath the bed. He drew it out, opened it, and ran his hand over the carefully folded dresses. Each piece represented something deeply personal, something he valued. He considered the diaries, now stored in a distant deposit box, and thought about how someone had read his most private reflections. The violation still stung, but it also solidified his resilience. In the following days, no more packages appeared, no more ominous notes. Greg Hayward left a short courtesy letter mentioning the intention to appeal the malpractice verdict to a higher court. Arthur responded with a formal acknowledgement, confident that the appellate system would do its job. He read the letter, recalling Hayward's veiled threats in the corridor and the final glare after the verdict. All of that seemed a lifetime ago now. He suspected that Dr. Wentworth's side would focus on standard legal appeals from this point forward, not blackmail. One evening, Mark, his young clerk, asked if Arthur wanted to join him and a few other colleagues at a local bar to celebrate the completion of several tough cases. Arthur, usually reserved, decided a moment of companionship might do him good. They headed to a cozy place near the waterfront. He sipped a mild cocktail as the group chatted about the city's legal gossip. At one point, Mark asked, "Judge, you've seemed a bit stressed lately. Everything okay?" Arthur paused, choosing his words carefully. He simply nodded and said, "I've been managing a complicated situation, but I'm better now." Mark offered a reassuring pat on the shoulder, and the rest of the evening was spent on lighter topics. Later that night, Arthur strolled along the waterfront, hearing the gentle slosh of waves. A breeze brushed against him. He closed his eyes for a moment, taking in the quiet, letting the last of his tension dissipate into the dark water. Perhaps in time he might confide in one or two friends about Annette. Perhaps not. The blackmailer had forced him to confront the reality of secrecy and risk, and though it had been harrowing, it reminded him that one's private life could be precarious when balanced on the edge of social expectations. Still, he felt a renewed sense of strength in knowing he had preserved both his moral grounding and his identity, two things that no threat could entirely extinguish. The next week, as his schedule resumed, he noticed a stack of fresh cases waiting on his desk. Mark had neatly organized them. Arthur lowered himself into his chair, rifled through the paperwork, and composed his mind for the meticulous reading required. He paused a moment, running his fingertips along the top file. Then he glanced at the small desk clock, took a steady breath, and opened it, ready to face whatever demands might come next in his career. In the months that followed, Arthur continued to preside over high-profile cases, earning praise from colleagues and forging a reputation that stood even stronger than before. The blackmail incident stayed buried in the recesses of his thoughts, surfacing only occasionally at odd moments, like the sudden snap of a camera shutter in his imagination. He remained vigilant, but he refused to be paralyzed by fear. He had weathered a storm designed to break him, and in the end, he had refused to yield. He kept his private life guarded, but he let himself enjoy the comfort and elegance of Annette when he needed an escape from the courtroom's relentless battles. Each time he looked at an orchid, whether in a bouquet or in a florist's window display, he felt a subtle internal shift. The flower had once signified danger and betrayal, a wedge that threatened to split him apart. But it was also something he had always cherished, an emblem of a side of him that was tender, refined, and quietly courageous. Over time, that symbol reclaimed its original meaning, reminding him that he was more than just a respected judge. He was also a person of depth and nuance, someone who had nearly lost everything but fought to keep his core values intact. Eventually, Dr. Wentworth's appeal was heard by another court, which upheld the original verdict. Arthur read the appellate decision with a neutral satisfaction, glad that the judicial process had carried on fairly. He found himself only mildly curious about whether Dr. Wentworth and his attorneys blamed him for their defeat. But no further threats materialized. The legal world carried on, always hungry for the next controversy, and soon new dramas replaced talk of the malpractice case. One brisk autumn afternoon, Arthur found himself in the greenhouse of a local botanical garden, invited to speak at a small panel on legal controversies in environmental litigation. After fulfilling his obligations, he strolled among the rows of vibrant plants. He was drawn to the orchid section, entranced by their intricate petals. He paused by a display of white lilac orchids. A caretaker happened to pass by, noting Arthur's interest. "Beautiful, aren't they?" she said. "Very delicate. They flourish best under careful attention." Arthur nodded, a gentle smile forming. "Yes, they require a nurturing environment, but they're worth the effort." He lingered for a moment, admiring the delicate colors and shapes, feeling a quiet sense of peace. Then he left the greenhouse, the warmth of it still lingering on his skin. He headed home with a small wave of reassurance, content in the knowledge that his life, though complicated, belonged to him alone. Night fell softly, and once again Arthur found himself behind his locked doors, safe from prying lenses. This time he removed his jacket and tie and walked through the house, reflecting on the simple fact that no blackmailer could define his fate unless he allowed it. The phone was silent, the mailbox empty. Upstairs, the lamp in his bedroom cast a warm glow on the dresser, where a single floral pin lay, one he sometimes wore as a net, shaped like a tiny orchid. He picked it up and smiled. Whatever else happened tomorrow or in the future, he had survived this test. He had proven that even the most menacing threats could be overcome, that the truth in the courtroom stood paramount. And while his private world remained carefully guarded, it was still his world, untouched by the cruel manipulations of those who had sought to destroy him. With that thought settled in his mind, he switched off the light. The house settled into quietude, and Arthur Penhaligon, unbroken, prepared for whatever new day awaited him.
Did you like the story? Hit that like button and tell me what you thought in the comments. Do you want to hear more stories? Subscribe and hit the bell. For exclusive content and early access, check out our Patreon. You can find the link in the description, or you can watch any of the videos shown on my right. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.